So hello everyone, today we have a guest on the show and we're talking about a really hot topic, which is it worth it to make your own compost? We have with us today Nicole from Glen Road Organic. It's a certified compost. Is it certified?
Our compost is a certified organic input, and then we have a small market garden that is also certified organic with some produce.
And you guys are in Ontario, Canada?
Yes, Kawartha Lakes region.
So today we're going to be talking with her about compost. What are the highlights about compost? How to make great compost? And I shouldn't give out the answer right now, but I've been one advocating for all these years. Like we've been buying compost through all these years in our market garden, and mainly because it's complicated to make good compost.
Yeah, yes it is.
And so that's what we're going to talk about today. So one of the question is to ask, what is the main thing that we should be thinking about when we're talking or imagining what good compost is?
The first main thing we start out with is inputs is the very basis of good compost. So when we make our compost at the Glen Road, we're very particular about where our inputs come from. And it's the basis of compost to make sure you have the correct inputs to get the heat for thermal compost, but also to get the microorganisms, to get the biodiversity for adding into your gardens. So that's the two biggest things, is just your inputs and making sure you have enough to make good compost from it. So we can make compost with manure. So manure is a high nitrogen source, and we can also make compost without manure. Works just as well. So market gardens like this, where you don't have a manure source, you can still make compost using just garden scraps and high nitrogen inputs, and then wood chips like we have on the garden. Those are a great addition into compost piles to add in the fungal content as well. Yeah,
so you want to have a mix of, I guess, the famous green, brown ratio and layering those. What do you have?
Yeah, so we use, there's 3 categories and inputs for compost production. You have your high nitrogen, which we call the party food, because that's what feeds your bacteria and just really increases the temperatures right away to get the heat that you want. And then you have mid-range nitrogen, which is also still bacteria food, which keeps the temperature stable enough through turns. And then you have your carbon or brown, which is wood chips, leaves, and all that, and that's your longer term fungal food, and that's what gets good fungal populations and all that.
Is it more important to have the right ingredients, the right ratios, or the right way to mix them up, or all of the above?
It's both.
It's both, okay.
It's always both in compost production. So mixing materials is always such an important process, because that's when you start to add in moisture into the compost process. So adding in moisture, if your pile gets too wet, it loses all its oxygen, but if the pile goes too dry, you start to lose your microorganisms and how they work. So you want to get the perfect 40 to 50% moisture. So pre-mixing ingredients is how you get good moisture into the pile. It also ensures you have consistency and no clumps, because if you start to get in clumps, that's when you start to get pockets that get too hot and start to lose oxygen and go anaerobic. So you want to pre-mix everything, and you can make compost in piles with really thin layers, but that takes a long time and a lot of dedication. So what we like to do is mix in kind of in bulk layers and then mix everything up at the end of the process.
How do you mix it up? How do you mix it?
You can do it by hand. So in gardens this size, you can make piles by hand with pitchforks, and we like to make them in like 1 to 2 yard piles, so about as tall as us and a good size around. We just made one earlier this summer at our farm.
Okay, great.
It's very doable, but I'm saying this it's doable because we use skid steers to make it. So you can use skid steers or a front loader on a tractor. So it's very easy to do that. You just make sure you can mix all your materials well, and they get in a nice cone round shape that peaks at the top. And then that hot center in there is where, like, that's where all the microbiology is working, and how you get the heat is in that hot center in the pile. And then when you go to turn, you take everything off the piles, and then you take that hot center out, and then you put what was the top into the center to get that to heat as well.
Okay, so you're moving your pile around.
Yes.
So when you're talking about manual, you're really talking about having a tractor.
But you can still do it with a pitchfork and shovel. That's
I would argue that this is borderline limit, because we do have a compost pile here.
Yes.
And honestly, like, we do at this farm have a tractor with a loader.
Yes.
It's a small compact tractor, but still, and even there, it's not that it's a lot of work, but it's not so obvious to get.
No.
And that's like me for the last 3 years trying to make something nice out of the food scrap.
Yes.
Out of everything that I have here, but still I'm not super quite satisfied.
It's a lot of effort to start out. Like, once you start to learn how to make the piles, that's when a lot of the effort comes in, because you're still learning about it. And honestly, when the pile is first starting, that's when it's at its heaviest in most labor. But as it starts to break down, it loses its mass, and it gets easier and easier with every turn. So that's when my favorite part of composting is starting from just all your raw materials. So we use cut hay for our high nitrogen, and sometimes manure, and then garden scraps. So whatever we're pulling out of the garden, we put all that into a pile. And then wood chips are our preferred carbon. And then we mix that all up. And then by the end of 4 weeks is how I like to make compost, is within 4 weeks, you're down to a nice compost. So it does get easier as the process goes along. Like, it's less.
Do you sift it?
We do.
Or screen it?
We do screen it on request, but we don't like to screen it all the time, because that really beats up the biology. So if we're selling compost to, like, cash croppers or people who are going to make extract, we'll sell unscreened compost, so you have more of the biology.
Okay, and why don't we talk about why having biology makes a difference? Why not just have, like, compost that kind of doesn't smell anything, it's kind of dry, that you buy at the local hardware center? Why not just use that?
The biology is the basis of everything that's healthy in your soil. So the way we farm and why we make compost all the time is we practice with the soil food web.
Yeah.
So using your bacteria, fungi, protozoa, and nematodes to create the soil food web in the soil, which enables, like, natural nutrient cycling and helps build structure through the bacteria and fungi. So when you're starting with the full soil food web and adding in the soil food web into your soil starts to work itself, and you do less work in it. So once you start adding compost, because compost is way more than just organic matter, it's adding in those microorganisms into your soil to bring life to your soil, and it does the work for you.
Okay, I see that the rain is just happening, Nicole. Why don't we go inside the greenhouse, where actually I've been putting compost, but not good compost, and I want to show you something. So you see the ground here, Nicole? This greenhouse, it was leveled to make, like, a pad to build the greenhouse.
Yes.
And we really stumbled the ground. So the ground's far from ideal, and I have a lot of places where the growth is not the same. There, you see it, like there's patches where it's high, low, and I've been telling Angie, our farm manager, just put good compost, make sure you broad fork, and eventually it's gonna blend well.
Yes.
But do you see what I mean? Like, you know, starting with poor soil sometimes is just not ideal.
Yeah, and you can see by the clumps in the soil how compacted it is just on the top too.
Yeah.
That's the sign of compaction and poor soil structure, is the clumps on top of the soil. So when you start to get into healthy soil through the addition of compost, you'll start to see that break up, because the bacteria and fungi start to break all that things up. Do you have clay soils up here?
It's not around here, because this soil was kind of like brought in.
Yeah.
It was kind of semi-good. So it was clay-ish, but not pure clay.
So clay is a really, like, clay is really bad for compacting and creating like those big clumps just because of the way water interacts with clay soil. So once you start to add in compost and get the microorganisms really starting to work, they start to break up the clay platelets, and then that can cause them to pull them into different aggregates, and that's when you start to see that really nice, healthy, aerated soil.
Do you think that it's an overstatement to say that soil biology equals fertility?
No, soil biology is your fertility.
Just like I'm running these things by you because I've been saying this for a long time, but you're definitely more of a soil scientist than me.
Yes, so it is fertility. Like on our farm, we don't use any inputs. All we put on the ground is compost. That's it. We don't use any additional fertilizers, just compost, because when you start to increase your soil biology, you get what is called the poop loop, which is essentially you start with your bacteria and fungi, and then your protozoa and nematodes come in and they start eating the bacteria and fungi, and then they'll take up what nutrients they need from the bacteria and fungi, and then they just excrete the rest, and that is available in plant available form for the plants just to take up right away. So once you start, like, you just have to start increasing your bacteria and fungi, and then once those populations get to what they need to be, your predators come in and then they start eating those and introducing all the nutrients you need into the root zone for your plants to take up immediately.
Okay, so you're definitely, if I'm getting this correctly, like the soil web is kind of creating the organic matter just because it's present and it's kind of regenerating and dying.
And like bacteria and fungi feed off of anything you put on the ground, like the straw mulch and hardwood chips you have out there, that's all food for your bacteria and fungi to start feeding off of, and that increases their population, and then that allows your predators to come into. We at the farm mulch everything with hardwood mulch, which is a great fungal food. So if we put it on in the spring, once we're done transplanting, by the time the next spring comes around, we have to reapply everything again because it's gone. Okay. So that's the soil food web at work for you, is when your straw and your hardwood chips start to disappear because the microorganisms are just constantly feeding.
So you're really seeing that the soil's alive. I have another question, tricky question for you. Do you think it's oversimplifying things to call out the earthworm and say that he's the indicator if things are going well?
There's so much more going on in the soil than just earthworms. Like, they're creating passageways within themselves, but you also have the microorganisms you cannot see that the earthworm is also feeding off of.
Because I was curious, some years ago I visited a worm farm, and do you know what they were feeding the worms?
Compost.
Compost.
Yes.
And I was really surprised by that. I thought it would be kind of like this mucky organic matter. No. Compost.
It's for some vermiculture, we don't do vermiculture, but for a lot of vermiculture, they'll start with like a bio-complete compost, and then just using the worm castings is like an additional, like bumping up of nutrients to the castings.
You said the word bio-complete. What does that mean?
Bio-complete is compost that has the full soil food web in it. So you'll find your bacteria, fungi, protozoa, and nematodes. So once you have your full soil food web, that's the soil food web school's term is bio-complete. We like to call ours biodiverse.
Okay, but it's the same concept.
Yes.
And is there like somewhat of a label that says that this is not certified, but it's like
we're trying.
It's a stamp that says bio-complete.
Yeah, we're trying.
Okay, so that would be the ultimate things, like to get bio-complete, biodiverse, compost for your market garden, or for your home garden.
Then that's the way you know that you're getting in these microorganisms when you're using stuff like bio-complete, biodiverse, something that indicates to you that there is the biology in there.
Okay, I know that this is a tricky question, putting you a little bit on the spot here, but do you think, and be honest, do you think that regular Joes like me can make biodiverse and bio-complete compost?
I definitely do.
You definitely do?
I do. If you have the correct teachers, you can.
Okay, and do I need a microscope? Do I need to measure it?
We would say to have a microscope, because then you know like just how well you're doing. But if you we always encourage people to take a look at what's happening in their soil underneath a microscope, because then you're seeing the full range of what's happening. Like, where are things going wrong and where are things going well? Like, we regularly look at our soil under the microscope.
But you specialize in that.
Yeah, just to see what's going on. We look at others too, don't worry.
Okay.
But that's when you start to see it. But compost, like, you can make compost.
I know I can make compost, but can I make like ultimate compost?
Yes, you can. It's all about the inputs. So it's what you're putting into your compost.
Well, I want to show you my pile because it's there.
Okay. Yes.
And frankly, at my home farm at La Grelinette, we've never made compost because we use
it's a lot of work.
It's, you know, we use 40 yards a year. But on this project, it's smaller and I have access to food waste, like the kitchen waste.
Yes.
So I wanted to make mine.
Yes.
But like, I'm far from thinking that this is something epic. Like, it's there and I layered it and I turned it, but I'm totally not sure that it's epic ground. Let's go see it.
It's not the right shape to start.
It's not the right shape. Oh, okay. There you go. So the other thing here, Nicole, about making compost is that I'm not the only one managing it.
Yes.
I have people from the staff from the kitchen coming in, dropping things. I have a mushroom guy that's coming in, kind of dropping things.
Mushrooms are great.
Mushrooms are great?
Once you start making compost, stop adding in new things.
Okay.
That, like, put it aside for the next compost pile and stop, like, don't keep adding in new things.
Okay, so finish this pile, start a new one.
Yes. And like, if you, like, the compost, when you start to make compost, chopping things up into smaller, it's a lot of effort, but making things smaller, like even running over with the tractor a couple times so it's like flat and squishy.
Ah, nice.
And then adding it into the compost pile is gonna do wonders because those aren't gonna break down well.
Okay.
They're gonna take a while.
Okay.
So, and it's in the wrong shape. You're gonna want something like half the size and then in a nice like pyramid cone shape like that. That's better and more manageable. So you're not trying to turn all this at once. You can make a new pile from what you have in here.
Yeah.
You're just gonna have to add in like some high nitrogen, which is your grass.
All right, so we're with Nicole of Glen Road Organic. She's definitely a compost, I'm gonna say specialist. I don't want to use another word, but you're definitely passionate about this, and I'm gonna follow your advice and kind of rework this. And in another video, I'd like for us to really talk about really all the ingredients of what makes a good compost.
All right.